Today we're talking about sitting poses, and sitting poses are pretty up there when it comes to hard things to draw in figure drawing, right next to lying down poses. So what can we do when something is difficult? Now, if you know me, you know I got some rules, so let's take a look at those. Okay, so these are totally new rules that we haven't seen before, but we're not going to go over them all again because actually they do appear in a lying down video, and if you guys want to know what they mean, you can go check out that. I'll put a link below. But don't worry, I'm still going to give you a bang for that free YouTube buck. We're going to add a new rule to sitting. So let's just add in a number 7 here. And don't worry, this is going to have a super professional name. It's going to be something you can really remember. And it is squishy butt. Let me explain. Okay, so what I see a lot of beginning artists do is they kind of forget, or maybe they don't really recognize that the body, the human body, it squishes. And this isn't exclusively talking about butts, but in this case, let's talk about butts. So when you're sitting, when you're laying down, whenever something is being compressed by your weight, in this case, the butt, it squishes. It becomes flat, and this is something that's going to give your figure some solid weight to the ground. So even though Flower is super bootylicious here, if we were to come in with our hand and give Flower a poke, you would see that it squishes. Now, I know this is funny, but what I'm trying to get to you guys is that even someone who is super fit, maybe has that Instagram booty or whatever you're thinking of, no matter what, muscle and fat squishes against surfaces. You can do it against your arm, you can do it on the squishy parts of your hand, and it's just something that we want to recognize. So let's excuse Flower and let's take a more realistic look. So here we have someone's random butt, right? Fantastic. Look at that butt. So what happens if they were to sit on a bench or a chair? Well, this is what happens. The booty flattens, okay? It squishes against the surface and it creates weight. And sometimes having a heavier or darker line down here can help emphasize that. But essentially it is squishing down, and there's really nothing that you can outwork to make it not squish. So I just really want to emphasize this. We're doing sitting figures. That involves sitting on their butts. So make sure when you have them sitting, they're not on a perfectly round balloon-like surface, because even if you press the balloon into a ground, it would also flatten to the ground surface. If we take a look at some of the pictures we're going to be drawing from today, some of where you see this squishing happening, of course, we can come right here to where the butt is making contact with the ground, and you guys can see it's just flattening a little bit. Of course, there's roundness to it. It's kind of stuck into a tube-like leg shape of your skin, but you can see that there's really a lot of weight and flattening happening, and almost kind of squares off that shape a little bit. So the one in here should be pretty obvious, but you should see right here it's kind of squaring out, and then right where the butt makes contact with that bench, the shape is flattening, right? Because if she stood up, it wouldn't be this flat. It is just kind of in this sense. We have someone squishing into a chair, and therefore the body is compressing. You'll also see this too, where skin is kind of going over a corner or a fold there. You can see that this is definitely straight, and that's going to give us that really nice straight against the curve kind of contrast. So kind of look for those two, as well as where the weight is being placed, which is right here in the hand. So you definitely have a nice flatness there. You can't even really see the bottom of the hand. So again, that adds to how the person is holding themselves up. Last example here, what I wanted to emphasize is sometimes where there's weight, you'll still see on these guys, you get some of these bumps and all these things going on. But realistically, what will help illustrate something more and quicker is if you were to come in and just keep something flat. You want the contrast of this curve up here against a flat line. This flat line coming through from here is really going to emphasize that leg, and this portion particularly, is on the ground, and it just looks like a really nice design against all the intricate curve shapes that are going on above it. From here, we're jumping straight into the figure drawing, so I just want to make sure you guys are ready. Have your sketchbook, your pencil, whatever you need. We're going to be doing 6 1-minute drawings, 4 2-minute drawings, and 2 4-minute drawings to finish it off. All right, we're jumping straight in. So with the 1 minutes, I have the halfway marks there. Some of them I kind of quartered it out. So do as you will. With the 1 minutes, we don't really have time to really care about proportions necessarily. So again, it's kind of up to you on how you want to run that. Remember, 1 minute poses are more about gesture, feeling, motion, acting, some liveliness, right? A couple things that I do want to say, just check the halfway point though. I put that there for a reason. It's kind of your cheat sheet. The halfway points on sitting poses, they do change because someone is losing height. They're losing about half a leg's worth of height when they sit down. If they're sitting in, a proper chair, or depending on the height of the chair, it's all different. So make sure you're kind of paying attention to those things. I put those marks there for you guys to use. Make use of them how you can. So we're sticking for some pretty simple poses for the 1 minute. It's going to get a little tricky later. But for the most part, straight on. I decided to go for my proportions on this one just because I felt like knowing where my halfway point is really helpful, just to kind of see that it's right at about the middle of the hip there. But again, we're really just trying to think of shapes and movement for this one. So the more you can not overthink it, the better. We all know that's my problem, right? Is I'm an overthinker. So again, just try to move from top to bottom. 1 minute poses are, your goal is to still get through the gesture. If you can get everything in, great. If you can at least get to the head, to the feet, that's great. Maybe some sort of resemblance of what the arm is doing. If you can't get the full arm in there, of course, drawing the reason is always try to get through, but you want to work on getting from point A to point B. All right, so now we've moved to the floor. So again, I want you guys to be thinking here, what are we losing when someone fully sits down, and what's the foreshortening? Okay, the camera is closer to her feet than we are to her body. So you can emphasize that. You can play that up. You can exaggerate it. Especially when you're doing a loose gesture drawing and you're not so worried about proportions here. Exaggerate, exaggerate, exaggerate. But you can see the halfway mark. It's at like her elbow, kind of right below her chest there. Definitely way higher than it would be if we were looking at a standing figure. So some things to just acknowledge, play around with. These things are going to keep switching. Like I said, if someone's on a chair versus on the floor, maybe they're on a stool, whatever it is, it's all going to change these proportions. And that's why those rules, they still apply, even though we're not talking about lying down no more. Okay, speaking of lying down, I didn't really know what to call this. It's definitely a leaning pose. It's like halfway before lying and sitting, but it's got to fit somewhere, so I put it in here. So with this one, I just want to really emphasize on the fact of get your weight points, and the main weight point here is that arm holding up the body, and that kind of sets you up. You can really do whatever you want from here. Exaggerate it, go super curvy, whatever you want, flat. So you can see, once I was able to find that arm, I went in and I just found a little indication of the hip, and then I used the clothes to find the rest of the form. Okay, so use those wraparounds, use the items that are there, and of course use overlap to hide things that are hidden. It really helps out when you only have a minute to draw less, right? So there you go. Okay, now we have another pose here. A couple of things to recognize. We are sitting down looking up at her. We're on the floor, she's up on some sort of seat. So kind of recognize that a little bit, and I really want you guys to see where the halfway point is. Her knee is higher than the halfway point. And this is what I'm talking about with exaggeration and foreshortening and perspective. That is not the average placement. Her toe to knee is bigger than the rest of her body for that leg that is touching the ground. That is something you want to emphasize and make a part of your picture, because it's going to make this pose work. So just don't listen to what your head's telling you right now. I know your head is saying that the halfway point is somewhere in the hips, and then you have to see the upper thigh. Where's the upper thigh? Just look at the pose, read the information, and go from there. All right, so this is gonna be our last 1 minute here. We have all different angles when it comes to sitting. So we have a back angle here. So something else also want to acknowledge, when sometimes back angles, even though they seem like there's less going on, They can actually be a little more complicated because there is less going on, so you kind of have less information to tell you where to go, which can be a hard thing. Something I do want to emphasize here too, this doesn't happen too much in the poses that I chose for today, but if there's a bench, if there's an object that they're sitting on, that is part of the pose. That's why the halfway mark or the full proportions there goes down to the last leg of that stool. It's part of her length, it's part of her height, it's something she's sitting on. So that's what I was building on top of. And I suggest you guys try to kind of incorporate that in your work too. Take a breath. We are at the 2 minutes now, so we have a little bit of breathing room here and a little more time for proportions. So use the cheat sheet I give you guys. If you haven't tried out these proportion marks yet, I really suggest you do. They are just going to set you up for success. If you guys look at how this broke down too, you can see that this person sitting on the ground, of course, because we're losing that leg height, is 4 heads high. Okay, that's a dramatic difference from normal proportions. So this is why we care about proportions and why we need to know the halfway and the quarters sometimes. And it doesn't have to be super accurate, but it's important to, again, know and let it play a role. Now, knowing some anatomy and some figure drawing here helps because we can see that that hip is being picked up, right? One butt cheek is on top of her leg and her heel. The other one is making contact with the ground. These are things to kind of notice. It's getting a little hidden behind that dress. But again, we always want to be able to put on our x-ray vision and see what's happening underneath the clothes, underneath some of that form, so that way we can better place things. You can see here I'm coming in and I'm starting to place a little bit of an indication of some fabric and folds, but it wasn't my go-to. I wanted to figure out the shapes of the pose first before I kind of started sitting in some flatness and other stuff like that. Now that you have more time, throwing in clothes is a really great tool because it's a great indicator to, of course, show which direction your figure might be facing, or it's also a great indication of wraparound shapes, showing the volume. Okay, when things wrap around with a nice round curve, you know it's wrapping around something 3D, three-dimensional. So try not to keep any of those lines straight or really rigid. Off the bat, we're noticing a couple things here, right? Weight distribution. She's got both arms and to her hands, right, down underneath her head. So you want to emphasize that point of weight. Next, she's off to her side. So this could be a good time to use your line of action if you feel like it's necessary. And it's also a good time to play with your design shapes, right? Contrasting straight versus curved. One side of her body is stretched here and one side is being compressed a little bit. Okay, so the side to our left is a little more straight. You want to try to ignore some of the exterior details like the chest and stuff and just kind of think of the rib cage leading to the hips. You can see it's pretty straight from that shoulder down to her shorts. From there, you kind of contrast on the other side with a nice curve of the back going into a curve of the hips, and it gives you a really beautiful design shape off the bat. Now again, we want to remember and emphasize and over exaggerate if you guys want to how long her legs are in this perspective. Okay, her legs are not naturally this long. Her knee to toe is not the same height as the rest of her body, right? From her hips to her head. She doesn't have that big of a lower leg, but the perspective is showing that, and you guys should really try to look past what you're thinking and draw what you're seeing a little bit here. This is why we do figure drawing. This is why we throw in some complicated poses like sitting and lying down. So take the moment to kind of swallow back some of those ideas of what you're thinking and just let yourself draw what you're seeing. At that halfway point is that knee. We got a bit of a complicated one here. So again, you got the 2 minutes, but that's not that much time. So try your best to just kind of move from top to bottom and recognize the proportions here. So the blue I got is kind of the width, the green is the height. Start with the height and you can figure out the width from there. If you guys can see from this left side of the head to where we see kind of like that underneath side of her thigh, or like, you know, right against the butt there, that is halfway width to where how far out her hand is reaching. Okay, so once you figure out that right side of the body, then you can figure out how far off her hand goes, if you guys want to be super accurate about it. Now, this pose is about 2 heads high. I just wanted to let that sink in there with a little bit of a pause. It's a 2 head high pose. That's dramatically different than regular proportions, and that could be something really hard for you to wrap your own head around. So make sure you're kind of noticing that. See those proportions. Remember that she's kind of reaching out to us. I wanted to show you guys here that this is a very complicated pose, and this wasn't my only time drawing it. So if you are struggling with it, I just kind of wanted to put this in here to show that I was struggling too. It's tough. So don't worry. This is one that I would revisit many times. If you guys have the chance to, I would come back and try to do this pose a couple times. But this is definitely a tough pose. So really take your time with it, and just kind of emphasize things. A lot of the play is in how she's reaching out with her hand. And again, just make sure you try to get in some of those details. So you can see I just threw in like a nice line for the arm there, on her right side, or our right side. And then I'm just trying to get in a little indication of the foot before the pose ends. All right, so we got another 2 minute here. And this one is a little more of a standard pose. The last one was hard, so maybe this is a little more of a breather. Again, use that time for the proportions here and to kind of figure some stuff out. You can see on this one, the halfway point is her chest. Okay, that's not the halfway point on a regular body. And I know I'm kind of overemphasizing this whole halfway point thing, but I do think it's really important because it's also really important with the lying down poses. And I think if you want a correct figure drawing, you want a dynamic figure, you want it to look believable, I think the secret sauce is going to be finding those proportions, right? So that's why I'm going to overemphasize this until you guys get sick of hearing me and you put this YouTube video on mute. But anyways, we just want to find a good figure for the pose here. You can see I'm kind of moving from top to bottom. I want to get the arms in. I'm so bad about getting the arms in because I get really caught up with the rest of the pose. So I'm just trying to throw in a quick indication. And of course, you got classic small head syndrome going on for me, because that's my biggest problem that I always and forever will probably need to work on. I'll call myself out on it. Don't worry. You don't have to call me out. Or do. All right, so we're moving through. Again, you want to remember that in this pose, you can see too, that shin and the foot, it's so much closer to us than her body. And again, we're having that situation where the knee to her foot, to her toes, is a bigger space than halfway a point of her body. And that's not generally what happens, but you can see here in my gesture, without even drawing too much detail, we now have a sense of force perspective, even if it's not quite fully figured out. On to the finales. I want to make sure that's plural there. We got 2 4-minute drawings here. So this is our first one. Now this is a little bit more of a standard pose. I didn't want to throw something too crazy in there. I wanted to give you guys time to develop and see how some of those ideas that we just practiced in a quicker form can now be utilized in the longer form. So remember, 4 minutes is a good chunk of time, but it's really not that much to get crazy detailed. So try to draw with the sense that you only have a minute or 2 minutes, so that way you get through the pose nice and rough, and then you can come in and add some detail here. I got stuck on the way that the arms were going down to the thigh. I just really like that design, where you kind of have these elbows to the arm pointing in, and then you can see where the knee to the toe, the ankles are kind of bowing out. It's like this really cool hourglass shape happening not with the body, but with the limbs. So I got stuck emphasizing that. If you can, don't do what I did, but again, I also can't argue or say I don't understand if you go for that as well. Now, a couple things to recognize here. Again, the shin, the knee to the toe, it's about halfway the same size as the body. So make sure you're recognizing that. It's something that I kind of messed up here a little bit. I could have made the leg a little bit longer in the end. If I were to go back and redraw this drawing, I would do that. But that being said, I got in what I could and the designs worked out. So you can see here, I got the top part of the figure. I got it mostly figured out, we got a good sense of the chin and the hand and stuff. And now I'm going to figure out the rest of this pose. Just kind of get in that leg. If you guys haven't noticed with some of the other ones, I'm really emphasizing that curve against the straight with the legs. So I know when I look at the picture that both sides of the legs kind of have that calf bow out, but the design looks so much better if I just have one side with that nice curve, one side straight. I can always come back, and I think I do in this drawing, I can come back and add that calf. Yeah, I just added it right there. So you can see, even just adding it right there, that design doesn't look that nice. It doesn't look that pretty, right? So it's something, again, that I probably would just keep out, especially out of a gesture drawing. If this was going to be an anatomical drawing, different story, but it's not, right? We're just kind of going for emphasis, story, motion, acting. What do we want to tell here, right? Now you guys can see I have a line going across. This isn't a proportion line. That was the line of what she's sitting on, because I can't actually see the underside of her thigh. But if this were a clear box, we could, because we're underneath her, we're below her. We're about at her mid shin height, probably taking this picture, maybe at the knee height. So we're looking up at her, right? And we want to try to keep that sense within our picture. What happens here, and I'll just call myself out on it, because I made the leg shorter, it now looks like we're more on the same level as her, or maybe we're taking a picture from like her chest height, maybe her shoulder height, which is something that you might want to do in your poses. So it's not necessarily wrong, it's just wrong for this pose. And I could have done that differently. So this is going to be the hardest one, and it's the last one. So you see what I did there? But anyways, we have perspective, foreshortening, all of it going on. Please acknowledge that and see that. We're not looking at her head straight on. We're looking from above her, okay? She's on the ground. We're standing up and taking a picture looking down at this person. So be aware of that and work that into your drawing. Couple things that you can notice off the bat: you do not see a neck, or you don't see any sort of clearance between the chin and the shoulders like you would if you're looking straight onto someone. You see that shoulder coming out from about halfway point of the ear. So make sure you're using that. Use these tools that you're seeing and just kind of copy them over to your picture, okay? So having those quarter marks on this one really helps. You can see that 3 lines down is about where her butt touches the ground. So that's kind of what I'm drawing down there right now. And it's just a rough indication. And you gotta remember with these two, it's gonna look a little funny when you first start drawing it, because your brain's telling you one thing and the reference is saying another, right? So with foreshortening, again, you gotta kind of ignore what your brain's telling you to do these classic normal things that when you're looking at someone straight on, because that's not our case. We're not looking at this person straight on, and we need to start adjusting things accordingly. So just like that last picture where we had the width, you guys can see my blue lines are the width, and I was able to find the width here, and so I was able to start throwing in the arms, and I kind of did a little bit of a connected dot. Because I knew where the arms were, I knew where to throw the legs, the thigh up to, right? So that helped me out a lot. And then, of course, knowing where the arm ends, I was able to have the other hand, which again, a little bit of a connect the dot game here. It lets me know where that hand is. I threw in a little bit of information on the hand there because that hand is so in the foreground. It's definitely in the focus of whoever's viewing your picture. And that was able to help me find and connect the arm back to the body. The arm looks a little long because of the perspective. So again, I just want to keep emphasizing this and until you guys acknowledge this. And let me know too if this is something you struggle with, because it's definitely something I struggle with. But again, taking a breath, thinking about the rules that I came up with, and kind of using that to your advantage will really help you out in this situation. Okay, so a little bit of a zigzag format here. Found one leg and foot. I was able to come in and then find the other just based off the placement of what I'm seeing in the picture. Now, what looked funny looks pretty solid now, right? It almost looks pretty dang close to the reference with, of course, some differences because that's art. But now that we were able to come in, throw in that rough, rigid gesture that you guys can see that I did, you can come in and clean some stuff up, whatever you feel like you need to here. I use this as a chance to kind of make the head a little more believable in this perspective space. But again, you guys can come in and add any detail to whatever you want. Maybe add some toes on there. Maybe have the knife or whatever she's holding on there too. It's part of the story, so you can always incorporate that into your work as well. And that is it. I'm sorry if that was long, but I just found so many great pictures and I wanted to throw in as many poses as I can. I'm going to try to find some male figure poses sitting if I can. I didn't see any when I was doing my initial research, but whenever I do find those, I'll try to put them together and put together a sitting male pose video for you guys. But again, let me know how you guys did. I really am curious. This is one of those things that is pretty hard. I think sitting might be harder just because of the foreshortening than lying down, but you could think otherwise. So let me know how you did in the comments below. If you guys have any ideas for future videos, you can of course let me know that. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.